Wow. What do I make of that ending? Is like, on the one hand, again, like it feels like we are where we should be, but then some things happen where I was like, hold on, what the hell? So Biggs came back. He never died in the first place. We don't know what happened to Wedge. We fought the Whisper thingies, and we defeated the Harbinger, the Arbiter of Fate, or whatever. And I'm still trying to understand if that was some kind of indication that by doing that we changed the fate of what's to come. I mean, I never played Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. That was Zack's story. But the scene we had there with Zack, I thought Zack was killed by the Shinra there. We didn't... Like, did that change as well or something? At the moment I'm a little bit confused about what stayed the same and what's changed, if anything. Like, are we in exactly the same place we were at the end of the original? Or has the situation changed a little bit? Because it said the unknown story will continue. Surely that's an implication that things aren't going to play out exactly the same as they did in the original. Because I took some of this like Whisper stuff, because I'm pretty certain that Whisper, the ghost business, wasn't in the original. And the fact that they're trying to protect the original, I took that to be a bit of a metaphor about the original fate of the world, because it showed Meteor crashing, I believe. It showed what happens to like Aerith and those guys. And now that we've defeated the Harbinger, and we had like that weird sparkly shit, does that mean that we've basically moved to a different version of reality or something? Like, or am I thinking too deeply into this? I don't know. Because it's so early, the game still is not out for another week. I don't really have anyone to discuss this with or read about. But just coming off the top of that, that's really interesting. Because I mean, the stuff to do with Shinra, like Rufus taking over, that all looked the same. The party's now left Midgard, they're on their way. So like most of the main pieces all seem to be there. But I think they've tried to plant a degree of unpredictability about what's to come. So, we're going to get another scene here? I think we need a little bit more. No? Okay, well maybe we'll get a set of credits. Maybe we'll get something right at the end of this, we'll have to see. But there we go. 23 years later, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Damn. Well, where to begin? Currently we have the voice actors scrolling. So for me, of course, as I've mentioned like throughout the playthrough, the most important thing was, did it capture the essence of Final Fantasy VII, and did it feel like I was playing a remake of an original classic? And for me, absolutely. I think they definitely did a great job of it. It had the right feel, it had the right emotions, it had the right like high points, had the right low points, and obviously in some ways it was definitely enhanced over the original, because you know, you're looking at a bunch of low res, low polygon blocks on the screen with dialogue, and the amount of emotion that could invoke in the original, now we have all of this like high resolution, we have these voices, we have the animations, we have the visual, we've got everything. And to me that just really did bring it to life in such a great way, without losing the essence of the original and what those scenes were supposed to be and what that story was supposed to be. Like, all of the characters felt like the characters that I know from the original, and yeah, I mean, I just didn't have a problem with it at all, and I really enjoyed it. And for me, that was literally the most important thing. And did they do it? I think they did a great job, so I'm really happy with it. Of course, probably like the biggest change over the original would have to be to do with the gameplay, because they've had to translate this into the modern age, and of course they've tried to maintain an ATB system like a hybrid as best as they could, but of course it was never going to be the same as the original Final Fantasy VII, and well, really it shouldn't be the same. I don't think you can have an identical system to Final Fantasy VII in this day and age. So I think for most people who love the original, or who like the original, enjoyed the original, a lot of it is going to come down to, did you enjoy actually playing the game? Because I think in terms of like the characters, the story, the cutscenes, the feel, the nostalgia, I feel like with that kind of stuff they did a really good job, and I don't think too many people are going to be disappointed with that side of it. But let's see if there's a cutscene, because these credits were short, and then I'll continue. Okay, so we have another set of credits. Fine. So yeah, in that sense, I think they really did get it. In that sense, I really do think they got it pretty much spot on. I mean, you're listening to it right now. The remake soundtrack. I thought the voice actors were all really good. I mean, voice actors, one of these really weird things that, like, as a YouTuber, because I read a lot of comments about a lot of these things, voice acting is really confusing. Like, I will hear people, like 10 people say that the voice acting is incredible, and there'll be one random person who say the voice acting is so terrible I can't enjoy this game at all. And 99% of the time I have no idea what they're talking about, because to me it sounds absolutely fine. I mean, I had people in the demo who were like, the voice acting is atrocious. And I'm like, how? Honestly, atrocious is such a big word to use. Like, that's got to... How? I mean, if it was me voice acting it, then maybe it could be atrocious. But come on, man. Like, I think anyone watching this thinking the voice acting was terrible, you're going to have to, like, really explain to me why you think that. It's a very, very, very small minority. But there are some people that are a bit weird like that. But if you ask me, I think they got them pretty close to spot on. Some notable ones, I would say, maybe... I love Barrett. Barrett is my guy. I mean, from the original Final Fantasy, if you guys watched the original LP, I've always had a lot of love for Barrett. I think he's a great character. I think he did fantastically well. I mean, early on, there were one or two, like, shaky moments where I was like, oh no, is it, like, during his dramatic scenes, is he going to get a bit silly and a bit cringe? But as the story went on, I thought he was fantastic. And as we know from Barrett's story, the best is yet to come when he meets, like, Dyne and those kind of guys. Like, he's got some amazing moments to come. So I'm really pleased with Barrett. Tifa felt right. Aerith, she needed a bit more of a homely voice, maybe a bit more youthful, quote-unquote girly voice than Tifa did, and for me that works. Tifa and Aerith were fantastic. Cloud himself, again, for me it just clicked instantly. I heard him and I was like, that didn't feel weird at all. And this is coming off the fact that I watched Advent Children about a week before playing this. I liked his voice in Advent Children 2, and I like in this one too. Like, it doesn't have to be one or the other for me. Absolutely fine. The team, the Avalanche team, fantastic. Gideon Emery as Biggs. I mean, dude's a legend. Got a lot of love for Gideon Emery because of Balthier from Final Fantasy 12. Jessie was an absolute joy. Really cute, really fun, flirty. Had a wonderful time having her in the story. And of course Wedge, who I've had a lot of love for, especially because he's voiced by Badger from Breaking Bad. So yeah, in that sense, I really think those guys brought these characters to life really well. The visuals, like going through the areas, I think for me it peaked when I came to Aerith's house. It was just so beautiful and it just felt so right, like in that area. And those little scenes that we had with Aerith and Cloud and stuff, for me, just like that was some of the peak moments of that side, of making me feel like the nostalgia of the original and really just reinventing it and remaking it in such a beautiful way. So I really do have a lot of praise for this game. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high. It's one of these things where, on the one hand, it's really easy because Final Fantasy VII is a game that's so great and loved by so many people that you have literally a blueprint on how to make a great game. All you have to do is find a way to translate it into 2020. And that is, of course, the risky side. I mean, it can go wrong, and it could have been a disaster. But I think with all of the, well, most of the original masterminds behind this series on board, you know, they weren't going to let this one fail. You cannot get this wrong, because if you screw up the first part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, for Square Enix, it could be the beginning of the end for the Final Fantasy franchise, because the 13 trilogy and 15 were not the best received games. They sold pretty well still, but they weren't the best received games in the world. And Final Fantasy 16, we've not even had a teaser. We have no idea when it's coming, what it's going to be, or anything. So in terms of Final Fantasy, aside from 14, which is getting a lot of love right now, I think Square Enix, a lot of people were starting to say they're on a downturn. I mean, their best days are over when it comes to Final Fantasy. Now, you could argue that could still be the case because they are technically remaking a great game again, but the fact that they made sure that they got this one right is just really important because of what it means for the future of the company and of the franchise. With this story, it has so many miles to go, and then you've got all of your other great Final Fantasies all just waiting to be remade someday in the future. So I'm just really excited, and I'm just so glad that this one turned out good. I mean, I'm pretty certain that a huge proportion of people that play this game who are fans of the original will say that this is at the very least a good remake and not something that really upset them or disappointed them or made them angry or whatever, like any dramatic negative feelings like that. So I'm pretty certain it's not going to cause any kind of backlash or outrage. They did a really good job. So now, what are some of the things that I need to talk about? The gameplay, I think it was good, man. Like, it wasn't perfect, like it wasn't amazing. I still stand by that. Like, out of 10, I think it was like 7.5 to 8 maybe. Like, it wasn't amazing, and I still love my original ATB. I will forever be like an OG ATB, CTB kind of guy. I don't think I'm ever going to be convinced by these modern day. You can switch it up however you like, but I don't think for me anything's going to compare to that original gameplay. But I'm one of these people that I'm just trying my best to let it go. You know, I can't expect it to be the same. This is it's a new age. You know, it can be the same game, but it's a new age and it has to play differently. And in terms of this hybrid system, I think it was really good in some parts. It did have its clunkier moments. I mean, all the way through, I had trouble like selecting individual parts or individual targets when there were fast-moving enemies, and I had to move the camera around as well. That was a bit weird. I couldn't get to grips with that. Like, a lot of the time, there were times where I just had to give up trying to target certain enemies or certain parts because I just couldn't do it. That was a bit clunky. There was a few little sections where we had the aerial enemies, and if you didn't really have spells or you're waiting for your ATB, you have to attack with your ATB to fill it up in the first place. So you had like Tifa and Cloud trying to like jump around and attack enemies to fill up the ATB so that you could unleash a spell and knock them out of the sky. And that was a little bit clunky too. When there were a lot of enemies, so if it was like a 3-on-3, something like that, it did get a little bit manic, and especially early on, like before you start to gain more abilities and you start to learn to play the game a bit better, it does feel a bit button mashy. But I think the best metric to compare this to is to Final Fantasy 15. Now, a lot of people didn't like Final Fantasy 15's gameplay, and I was one of them. I mean, didn't like is probably still too strong. I mean, for me, it was just like, you know, it was sufficient to get through the game, but it really wasn't something I truly enjoyed in any major way. Now, this is a definite step up for me because it does have some elements that are reminiscent to 15. But they introduced a stagger element from 13, which I thought was quite nice. And of course, you have the ability, like whenever you want, if you've got the ATB, to literally pretty much stop time. I mean, it's slow enough that it's almost like you've stopped time. And to pick and choose your moves, you can heal people, you can use your status effects, and you can use your spells and your big moves and all that kind of stuff. So in that sense, I can't really complain. Now, I think I've talked about the gameplay and I've talked about the feel. The story, I mean, of course, you already have the blueprint of Final Fantasy VII, so how bad could the story be? I think the story was great. There were, the ending still has me in a little bit of a situation where I'm not completely sure if I understood what happened there. But I think they're deliberately leaving you with a bit of doubt in your mind as to what's going to happen in the upcoming game. So I think maybe that's normal, because I'm someone who knows the Final Fantasy VII story to a decent level. I mean, I'm not an expert on Final Fantasy VII, but I think I know it well enough to know if there's been some changes and some confusing things. And I think the situation has changed a little bit from the original. Now, story-wise, I think some of the stuff that they added in was really good. It's taken me about 45 hours or so to finish the game. Really didn't feel like there was that much fat in this game. I mean, maybe a few hours excess that they could have done without. So, namely, the bit before the airbuster fight, the bit where we had to shut down, there were like those solar light things that we had to shut down, that felt a bit long, and the bit with the ward, so Hojo's tests, there were 4 of them. I think maybe that could have been a bit less too. So those are 3 standout bits I felt were a bit too long, but they maybe make up like 10%, 15, 20% of the game maximum. Not 20, more like 10 I would say. So I think for the most part there really wasn't that much fat on it, and a lot of it was just entertaining, good fun, and it gave you like extra insight into the world. It built the characters up a little bit more, you got to enjoy the world more, that kind of stuff. So I didn't have any problems with it. Stuff like Chapter 4 with the Avalanche team going to Jesse's house and doing that whole infiltration thing, I thought that was really fun, and it was a good way to get to know them better and really feel like you're a part of the team. Because you know what happens later, that stuff gains a lot more weight, and it was really, really necessary. Now, of course, I'm still in 2 minds about what's happened in terms of like Wedge and stuff, because Is Wedge dead? I guess we have to find out the next game. They've left that one on edge. But I'm really happy that Biggs made it. And maybe the fact that Gideon Emery voices him is a little bit of a clue, because maybe he's going to be in the next one as well in some way. Because Gideon Emery is not, he shouldn't be a guy that just does little side characters. He should be, he's a leading man, right? So I think that's cool. Jessie unfortunately really did die, and I think given like her relationship with Cloud and the fun that we got to have with her, I think they still had to pack some emotional punch, and losing Jessie was of course that punch. So that seems valid to me. So in that sense, I mean, they did good, because when you think about it, I think I gotta think about this game within the context of how much of the original is actually showing. Because when you think about it, if you take Final Fantasy VII, the original, from the start of the game to the end of Midgar, is that one of the greatest Final Fantasies of all time? No. I mean, for me, like, what makes Final Fantasy VII one of the greatest of all time is the entire package. So they've had to take a section of the original that was good, like it was great in parts, but wasn't like, you know, as a complete package enough to make Final Fantasy VII one of the greatest Final Fantasy games and one of the greatest games of all time for a lot of people. So they've had to turn that into a full-length game and try to make it as great as the original. So, I mean, that is a pretty impossible task if you ask me, because Final Fantasy VII, the original, is such a benchmark for a lot of people that taking only the Midgar portion and trying to make it as great or better than the entire of the original Final Fantasy, I mean, that was like, you know, I think that's a bit of a tough ask. So in terms of comparing this to the original, like as an overall, like which was the better game, I don't think it's really a fair comparison. If you just compare the Midgar section of the original Final Fantasy and you compare this game, then again it's an unfair comparison, because this is like 45 hours worth of a section that took 8 hours in the original. So if you see what I mean, that's why I'm not going to try and get into the game of trying to say, oh, which one's a better game and all this stuff, and that kind of thing. So if you put everything into context, I really do think that this was a really great effort from Square Enix. I'm really glad this game finally came out after so much waiting and so much anticipation, so much hype. You know, everyone's been talking about this game for years and years and years, and it finally came, and it did not disappoint. So the credits are over. As always, I managed to talk all the way through them. What do we have now? New Game Plus? Hard mode? Yeah, chapter selection has now been unlocked. Open the main menu and access system, chapter selection to replay any chapter from the beginning using your current characters, weapons and material. This is a great way to tackle uncompleted quests, find story elements you missed the first time, and explore and more thoroughly explore Midgar. Cool. Hard difficulty is now unlocked and can be selected by going to chapter selection and playing one of the chapters. In this difficulty, items cannot be used, and only HP is restored at rest points. However, certain manuscripts are only available in this difficulty setting. Ooh. A record of your adventure can be viewed from System Playlog. The log contains information, battle records, story branches. Okay. You will now earn twice as much experience and 3 times as much AP. A new combat simulator has become accessible from Hojo's lab. To test it out, select Chapter 17, skipping the bike minigame. The bike minigame can now be skipped from the pause menu. Okay. That's cool. Right. Let me throw in a save here before I fire anything back up. So yeah, 43 hours in, and we've got our first playthrough done. Okay, so weapons, if I just press circle now, where am I? Oh, you cannot leave the main menu at this time. Replay any chapter from the beginning. Be advised that if you return to the title screen without first saving your game, you'll be unable to use this data. Ah, okay. Play log. Battle Intel 15 out of 20. Coliseum Challenge completed 0 of 11. Shinra Combat Simulation 1 of 11. Odd Jobs completed. Okay, so Odd Jobs basically being like side quest kind of thing. 1724. There's only 4 enemy skills. Range between 8 of 56. 29 of 31 music is not bad. Cloud's dresses obtained 1 of 3. Eh? That's interesting. Chapter 14 resolutions. Witness 1 of 3. Okay, this is some good info right here. Chapter selection. When replaying a chapter using chapter selection, quest and story data will be temporarily reset. You will retain all acquired collectibles such as music manuscripts. Completing a chapter will update your previous play data, but switching to a new one midway through will cause you to lose your current progress for that chapter. Okay. Cool. So which one was chapter 14? There was no such errors. Enough friends have been, and each of them resolves to fight for Eris' safe return. There's different outcomes in this one? That's interesting. Okay, so I think for me, I missed out 2 odd jobs here, so this is where I could start. Let's just fire it up and put it onto hard mode, because why not? Let's just go for normal for now. We'll check out hard later. So once everything's reloaded, I'll be able to continue talking, because there's a few more little points I want to make before wrapping this up for now. Okay. So I think I'll finish talking. Okay. So a few things. First being enemy skills. Why did we only have 4 of them? That was not great. I mean, I'm not happy with only 4 enemy skills. That felt a bit nerfed. 2, where are the rest of the limit breaks? I don't know why we only had 1 limit break. I understand that we have the ability thing now, and that's supposed to like mitigate it, but limit breaks are limit breaks, man. I mean, that's just a part of Final Fantasy VII. I mean, I was expecting to be able to get some more of them. I thought maybe some of them could be accessible when you play in hard mode or something like that, but they're not. So that was a bit odd, not having any more limit breaks. I think weapon selection was fine. I mean, I think I've picked up what, like... I've got 6 of them for Cloud. Maybe there's 1 or 2 more I can pick up, or maybe even more than that. So I think that's good enough. That's not a problem. I did like the weapon upgrade system. It keeps all of the weapons relevant, and it gives you a lot of choice. That's what was quite cool. Because in the original, like, you know, obviously a weapon, you couldn't make it any better than it was. So once you moved on a few hours, you never used that weapon again. So I quite liked that. I thought it was good. That was a positive change. So that was a bit weird. But one of the major things was like, what the hell was that Roche thing about? Who the hell is he? Why did he appear and why did he disappear like that? I was so sure that he was going to come back into the story and he just wasn't there. Why would they introduce that guy? I mean, he just came with no context. We had a fight against him and then he left? Like, what? So that was very weird. I mean, I love the fact that they introduced someone new and it was really fun to fight him and stuff, but without any context, that was a little bit weird. I don't know why it happened like that, but okay, I mean, you know, fair enough. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it was a bit strange that they chose to do it like that, so okay. So yeah, I mean, that's another thing. So yeah, I mean, there were some things that were oddly either, like, deficient or just completely missing, so... I mean, that was a little bit odd, but trying to think what else. Yeah, the quests, I would say, were average to good at times. I think they could have done better with the quests. I mean, that's one area where I would have liked to have seen improvement. Because, I mean, yes, I mean, I really enjoyed my time with this and they did a fantastic job, I think. But, as always, it wasn't perfect. And I think the odd jobs were one of the areas in which they needed to do better. Some of them were genuinely fun, and they did feel like they had some story attached to them, or some world building, or at least some intrigue. So like the Angel of the Sums being the obvious one. They did some work to interconnect them, which was nice, which I appreciated, but for a lot of the time it wasn't like, it just didn't feel like it had enough story to it to make that interconnection worth it. So yeah, I think I would have liked those to have been a little bit better. Um, of course, as I said earlier on, for me, I think one of the biggest things that remains in my head is like, how are they going to do this? You've taken like an 8-hour section, tops, and you've turned it into a 45 hour game. Okay, take away the odd jobs and everything, that's still like 35 hours or so, I would say. Now, the rest of the game is huge. There's so many towns, so many areas. You've basically got like a world map. You've got like an open world situation almost going on. How are you going to manage all of that, and how are you going to squeeze that into like a second game? I think the answer is they can't, surely. I mean, how are they even going to do that? So that's all I'm thinking, because they've expanded Midgar so much. How are they going to manage this for the rest of the game? When is the next game going to come out? What is it going to contain? Are they going to go for an open world format or keep it linear like they have with this one? I really don't know. I have no idea. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting to find out. But now they've done a good job with this first one, I think that's going to give them like the finances, the fan backing and the support that they need to keep working on the second and hopefully make that a great experience. Because really, this is just like a season 1 finale. The real story is only just beginning. I mean, Sephiroth, we had the fight against him at the end just to give us something big, because you didn't want to end it at the end of the motorbike chase and then just say, okay guys, we're leaving Midgar, we're chasing Sephiroth now. You had to have something bigger than that, and they gave us a giant boss battle, and then they gave us the one-on-one with Sephiroth, of course, and I think they kind of had to do that to really give this game like an epic finale that it needed to have, because you can't end it any other way. So now that that's all done, it's just like, okay, so where do we go from here, and how are they going to tackle this? The only thing I'm thinking is, because it said like unknown, that unknown word has really like put a lot of question marks in my head. What I'm kind of thinking about is just, I don't want to go too deep into it right now, because I've been playing the game very intensely for like the last 4 days or so, and I feel like so much happened. Like everything felt very similar outside of like certain smaller plot points that have shifted around, and like, let's say the way Sephiroth was introduced was different to how it was in the first game. But obviously, seeing like the way things ended, I think that has enough context where, because Sephiroth is going to be the eventual main villain of the game, I think they still wanted to introduce him. And because we end up having to have a boss battle against him, I think they needed to introduce him much earlier and kind of keep him as like this kind of shadowy figure that's going to continue to torment Cloud and like mess with him throughout the game. So he wasn't introduced as subtly as he was in the original, but I think considering that we fight him at the end of Midgar in this way now, I think that kind of makes more sense. But when it comes to like the actual kind of ending, it does feel like, I don't know, that it could be one of two ways. Like either it's, you need to kind of really sit down and analyze the ending. I mean, there's still a week to go till the game comes out, so by the time I have any real kind of analysis available to me where I can watch other people, I can read other people, I can discuss it with other people, like that's going to be a while yet, so I can only just literally just react to it. And I think in that sense there's one of two ways I feel like you could go with it. I mean, you could either really take this quite literally and view it as, holy shit, like the rest of the story is going to be different. Like we might be in a different timeline, we might be in a different universe, like some crazy shit has just happened, and the like Final Fantasy VII as we know it is dead, and like it could be like this major different kind of story. Now that's one way of looking at it, and that's not how I'm looking at it, because I still go back to what I heard from Kitase himself. Now I get that Nomura's involved and he's a bit more of a wacky storyteller, but I feel like Kitase is a very important figure in the history of Final Fantasy, and he's had major involvement in some of the greatest ones. Now if this guy is saying that they didn't want to cut anything out from the originals, and that's why it's like a multiple part remake, because they want to keep everything in, I feel like to go from that statement to everything is going to change, I think it is just drastic, because then it's not a remake. We've got to remember this game is called Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's not called Reboot. It's not literally called Final Fantasy VII. It's not like some kind of Spider-Man or Tomb Raider reboot or whatever it is that we've seen in recent years. This is still Final Fantasy VII Remake, and up until what we had with the Arbiters and like the Whispers, it felt very much like exactly what it was supposed to be, like a remake, and they expanded out certain areas, And yes, certain things shifted around a little bit, but nothing that would make you go, holy shit, like this is a whole different thing now. So when I think of it in that sense, and I think of what they needed to do for the finale of this game, and what they need to do for the upcoming games, and the feeling and the energy surrounding the next games, I feel like the whisper thing it goes down for me as more of a negative point, I think, because it's a weak writing device. Anytime you introduce beings like this, you really set yourself up for a difficult time, because as soon as you introduce beings of this nature and of this power that have this objective, then you start to it gets a bit silly, because then you're like, well, okay, so in this scene they behaved in this way, they let this thing happen, but then in this other scene they behave like this and let this thing happen. Why did that happen? So I'm thinking obviously Wedge is like the clear example. So I mean, if these guys can intervene in this way, there is absolutely no way that Wedge should have survived the fall from the pillar in the first place, because you saw how powerful the Whispers are and the Arbiter is. If these guys want to kill little old Wedge, they will kill him. So they don't kill him there, and then later on they find this really shitty, cheap way to literally suck him out of the Shinra building and drop him down an elevator shaft. It's like, well, if you could have done that, then why the hell was he even around in the first place? Then it was like the Barrett and President Shinra scene. So President Shinra is the one who was supposed to die in that scene, and he did, but Barrett never got stabbed in the original by Sephiroth. So why did they even let him get stabbed in the first place? And then it was like, oh shit, sorry, like we let this guy get stabbed, we need to fix this, let's do some magic, voodoo, whisper magic to bring him back to life. It's like, did he even come back to life, or was that an illusion? So I think when you start getting into this whole thing, it does get a little bit weak. Like Final Fantasy VII wasn't really a narrative that had those sort of weaknesses, and it's similar to the kind of stuff that you could talk about when it comes to like Fireflies or Final Fantasy X. So it gets into that weird Deus Ex Machina territory, and the behavior has to be so on point and so consistent, and it has to affect the story in a way that doesn't diminish it. That I think the Whispers were an extremely dangerous move, and like they weren't terrible. I don't think they ruined the story, but I can definitely see some people that would have seen this whole Whisper thing and be like, they made a total mess of that, and I don't like it, and that's understandable. Now, again, sorry, I deviated a bit, but coming back to like my original point about this whole thing, I feel like I would take it more as they introduced the Whispers as a device in the first game to give you something to kind of have to defeat at the end, because when you look at Final Fantasy games, there is always this final objective where you have to fight some sort of godly, ultra-powerful being, and humanity has to overcome their fate, their destiny, and all this kind of stuff. We've seen it countless times through the years, and I think they probably felt like this game is lacking that, because it's literally just Cloud, Avalanche, and those guys versus the evil Shinra Corporation, and maybe they felt like that wasn't enough for the ending, and they wanted to introduce this. And yes, they could have probably just completely left the Whispers out and just had you fight Sephiroth some other way, but I think the Whispers also were a way to facilitate kind of having Sephiroth pop up at the end of the game and make us fight him and that kind of thing. So I feel like it was more of a plot device that was needed for this particular game, as opposed to like big, like crazy changes and like crazy theories about what's going to happen next. And there were like flashbacks where they showed Aerith's death, like that scene, but then we beat them, so they're planting this seed of, oh wait, now does Aerith live? And then we had the Zack scene where it looked a little bit different from the original. Does that mean that Zack actually lived? And I mean, it was strange to me because I'm trying to recall, but I think there was like a vision that they showed everyone with, it's either Red or like Red's offspring. It's like the final scene of the original, and I believe in the final scene they run all the way to the edge of like a cliff face, and you see like what looks like an abandoned Midgar. Now, in the flashback, in the remake, the scene that they show is barely like 5 seconds, and it only shows Red and co running. So you don't even know what the fate was that they showed you there. Like, was it supposed to be the destruction of Midgar? Like, is that the fate that they were trying to protect, or was it a fate where Midgar wasn't destroyed? So, I mean, I was a bit confused by that because everyone seemed to understand what that meant, but I'm putting myself in their shoes. If someone showed me a vision like that, I'd be like, well, I just saw a bunch of reds running. So, like, what does that mean? What are you trying to protect here? So, I mean, it is a bit strange and a bit, like, difficult to wrap my head around at the moment. So, that's why instead of going down, like, the big kind of theories and changes route, if I frame it in that sense, and also the idea that I think by doing this, they also get to keep an element of mystery and intrigue about what's to come. And also, on top of all of that, it gives them a license to make some changes. So, I mean, I think they didn't do all of this to not have literally any changes and have a 100% identical game for the rest, but I also don't think that they did all of this stuff to completely change the story. So I still think Aerith's going to die. I still think it's going to be like the whole Meteor narrative and like the, you know, trying to save the world from Meteor and all that kind of business. But I think this kind of, they tried to open the door for themselves to maybe potentially, you know, omit certain parts of the story or for things to play out in a different way. I'm thinking of Wutai, Yuffie, I don't know, like a place like Fort Condor maybe might not be in the remake, so that kind of stuff. But I'm not seeing this as like a crazy, the entire landscape has changed and we've got alternate universes and, you know, we've got time travel and all this kind of crazy stuff that might have happened. Right now, as like a reactionary thing, I'm not into that at all. I don't think that's a thing. I just think it's literally just a way for them to make the ending of the game more exciting, to give it a more conventional Final Fantasy feel, to give them license to change things up a little bit, to make some changes where people aren't going to be completely outraged and they would have seen it coming, and also obviously a way to leave a little bit of hope and unpredictability about what might happen in the story. Because I'm sure there's some people now that have seen this and will think, wait a minute, there's a chance for Aerith to live in this version of the story. That might be true, who knows, but I think it might pack more of an emotional punch if you think that it's possible that she might live and she dies in maybe a different way or like a different, I don't know, but I feel like she's still got to die. But I think it might help to retain some of that emotional punch if there's a little bit of doubt about what's going to happen to her based on what we've seen. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any like big deep analysis about the ending right now. It's way too soon, but I will be curious to check out what other people have been saying about it. And I feel like there's going to be multiple camps. There's going to be like the big theory people. They're going to be picking apart like every single line and every single piece of detail they can find to try and come up with theories about what's happened. And then there'll probably be like the more kind of chill people who would be like, yeah, it's probably not that deep. And it's actually just going to be probably still fairly similar moving forward. So we'll have to see. In terms of end game content, we've got battle simulators and we have the Colosseum. So yeah, okay, fine. I mean, it's not the most imaginative thing I've ever seen. I do wish they maybe found a way to introduce some more stuff. I mean, I would have liked to have seen maybe some secret areas that you can't access like at any point in the game, and you can only like maybe when you complete the game and return through chapter select, like an extra area becomes available and you have like a tough boss battle there or something like that. That would have been a bit cooler than just like combat simulator. But you know, we're going to see how those battles play out. I mean, this game, when it gets hard, it gets really, really difficult. So I'm expecting some really tough battles moving forward. So yeah, I mean, those are the main kind of gripes. Endgame doesn't feel as imaginative or as in-depth as it could have been, because that's one area where they could have just let loose. I mean, story-wise, there's only so much scope that you have for the Midgar portion of Final Fantasy VII. But for the post-game, for like endgame stuff and the quest, they really could have done a bit more, I think. So that's probably the main, like, biggest area in which I do think they could have done a bit better. But other than that, I think the game has turned out really well. I'm personally happy with it. I hope that you guys are too. I hope you enjoyed watching. Those of you guys who played, I hope you loved it. And I got a shout out to Square Enix for sending me an early copy of the game. Specifically to Ria from Square Enix, because she's been the one that's helped me with this kind of stuff, and I met her at a Square Enix event. She's a lovely person, and that's 2 occasions now where she's been really kind and sent me early copies of the game. It's really, really important to the channel, and I really appreciate the fact that she helped me with this and supported the channel with the copy. So shout out to her. And just Square Enix in general have been really good to me. For people that don't know, for Final Fantasy 13.3, I was having a huge number of copyright problems, and I was able to basically communicate with them and send them links to all of the videos that had issues, and they were nice enough to help me sort that out. So Square Enix themselves, like having the company that develops your favorite game of all time and releases that you're really looking forward to playing and that you really love in the future, is just such a huge deal for me, and I really do appreciate the fact that Square Enix have my back and they're supporting me with this content. So shout out to those guys. Thank you all for riding with me on this one. I really appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed the playthrough. I hope I did it justice. Gotta remember, it's a first time playthrough, even though it's a game I know. It's completely been remade, revamped, you know, reimagined. So it was fresh. I had no guides to go by. If I got stuck on something, I had to figure it out by myself and that kind of stuff. So I did my best. I hope you all enjoyed it. And you can look forward to more from the Final Fantasy VII Remake as I take a look at some of this optional content, where we have the Colosseum and we have the simulator and that kind of stuff. So I'll be returning with more content soon, but for now I need to get to work on the movie version, because I want to make a movie version for you guys, because I think this is one game that could definitely benefit from it. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching as much as I enjoyed playing, and I will see you all for more soon. Take care.